We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
Welcome back to Liberty Nation Radio, heard coast to coast on the Radio America Network. I remain your host, Mark Angelides. Now, we're very fortunate to have with us Liberty Nation's national security correspondent, who also happens to be a retired Air Force pilot and former Principal Deputy Undersecretary of Defense Controller, Mr. Dave Patterson. Thanks for joining us, Dave.
Happy to be with you, Mark, always.
So, Dave, there's a couple of things I want to discuss with you today, and I think national security is really coming to the fore, not just because it's an election, but because of events that are happening around the world. And the first of those is a defense minister, Mr. Umerev, I think it is, Rustem Umerev, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, has started touting what I initially termed a peace plan, but you correctly corrected me, saying, no, it's not his peace plan, it's his victory plan. And I want to go through a few of the elements of Ukraine's victory plan here, because, and I suspect that you and I will actually quite disagree on what these, the benefit of these points that are being laid out. But as you are the expert, I will bow to your superior knowledge in this. So the first and probably the most significant one, in my opinion, is that he's asking for an immediate ascension to NATO. Now, that seems incredibly unlikely, doesn't it, Dave? Or does it?
Well, it will be unlikely now, of course, while fighting is going on. And what he's asking for is, in his words, unconditional invite, which means he wants to cut through all of the normal red tape that attends being invited into NATO and become a member immediately. But when you think about this, I mean, it's kind of not a good idea even for him, because in any negotiation with the Russians to stop the fighting, that's your negotiating point, right? I mean, you want the umbrella of NATO defense as a negotiating point, which you have to be willing to give up if the Russians are willing to get out of your country. So it seems to me that to be hard over on this one particular point is not a good idea. And I can just about guarantee that the NATO nations will see it as a negotiating point.
Well, that's the funny thing, isn't it? Because, as you say, an unconditional invitation, and one of the conditions of NATO membership, as far as I'm aware, is that you can't be involved in a current conflict, because that would automatically, under, I believe is it Article 5, mean that all the other NATO countries are automatically involved, and therefore they have a stipulation that you can't be involved in some kind of conflict when you're ascending to the NATO bench. Is that about right?
Well, it's one of the first sections of the NATO treaty, that was signed in the late 40s and in Washington, D.C., called the Washington Treaty, amazingly enough. And I mean, the fact that you would not be considered is kind of secondary to the fact that you don't even get to be considered initially, because you've got a conflict going on your border.
So that would, yes, essentially, Mr. Umerev is asked, or Defense Secretary Umerev, I think is the right way to say it. He's actually asking for NATO to become an active participant in the war beyond just supplying material.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, how can you look at it any other way, right? I mean, if you're a member of NATO, then that umbrella covers you. And you can't say, and NATO would probably never agree to, oh, well, we just want to be a NATO member in name only. Well, no, that's not going to work. Why do that?
Yes. Yeah, it's, so that really, as the central plank of it, it seems to me to be a complete non-starter. But another item is, and I think for you, Dave, I think this is the the one that really stands out is that they want a unilateral lifting of any sanctions imposed on using US and NATO and other country-supplied weaponry within Russia.
That's right.
Yeah.
And it seems to me that with or without any of the other parts of the victory plan, this is the most important because it does two things. First of all, it puts at risk important places in Russia that provide military capability, training areas, infrastructure, facilities that house and warehouse weapons, airfields deep in Russia. It puts them at risk. Now, that is a military capability. It's a military issue that I don't understand why we have not given the Ukraine the permission to use our weapons, ATACMS and long-range missiles, to hit those military targets. I mean, think about the perverse logic that says, oh, we're fine with Russia decimating the infrastructure and all manner of places inside Ukraine, but we're not going to let Ukraine reciprocate. That's insane.
I'm going to play devil's advocate on this one, Dave. See, to me, it seems that there's a calculation going on, and that calculation is how likely is President Putin to see the use of foreign armaments, materials, used within the borders of Russia. How likely is he to see that as a direct involvement of outside forces, and therefore a direct escalation which he would have to respond to? And I think that's the equation that's being weighed in Washington and across Europe. Because there's also, and people forget this, I think, that Russia, we talk a lot about the losses on the battlefield, Russian losses, and I think it's estimated the latest around 500,000. 500,000 in a battlefield loss is not an endpoint for Russia. That's really just them deciding now we're committed or not. And I think that would just create an escalation, wouldn't it?
I think that is the calculation, and that is the excuse that the Western nations are using. I think that would put using the long-range missiles in Russia would put the Russian people now at the front line of the battlefield, right. Whereas they're sort of remote, and they can be oblivious to what's going on, except for, of course, the families of those lost. But once you start to hit their power plants and turn their lights out, now Putin reacting in some really untoward way is not going to improve their status. You'll have to remember that when the Soviet Union was involved in Afghanistan, it was the loss of upwards to 50,000 of their troops, and with no end in sight, that caused them to withdraw.
Yes.
I don't see that point of view has gone away, and right now, like I say, the average folks in Russia are not experiencing the war. Mm-hmm. And I think that Zelensky would like them to, as much as his people are experiencing the war. I don't hold to this notion that Putin would revert to tactical nuclear weapons. I mean, that is so unthinkable in terms of the world geopolitical dynamic that even he understands that.
He may, but what about his partners in what are they calling it now? The axis of resistance. I think that there may be less level heads in there, one of them being Kim Jong-un, who's now, I believe, supplying actual military people to support his war effort.
Well, President Zelensky believes that they are already on the battlefield. I'm not sure about that, but I do know that they have they're very close to deploying a battalion of about 3,000 fighters, and many of whom are now in Russia training. So yeah, that's and I think that raises the ante, but it raises the ante in a conventional way, and we have not, as we have observed with Iran, we have not even begun apparently to put the kind of sanctions that really hurt on North Korea and Russia. And the reason you know this is because their economics are better than they have ever been.
Yeah, it seems to be a bit of a backfire in terms of the diplomatic strategy. Dave Patterson will be right back with you after this short break. Listeners, don't go anywhere.
We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.